Welcome back to Puerto Rico Life. My name is Jeffrey Holst, and this is Puerto Rico Life. So, all right, couple of things. So, many of you know I just got back from a very quick 5-day trip to Puerto Rico, and we made some great progress on that. But that's not what I'm going to talk about with you today. We have made several other videos about that. Today, instead, I'm going to talk about this book right here. And I'm sorry that it's in reverse, but that's what happens when you record. So it's called Puerto Rico, What Everyone Needs to Know by Jorge Dunay. I think that's how he says his name. So Professor Dunay is the director of Cuban research and a professor of anthropology at Florida International University. And he's published, according to this book cover, extensively on migration, ethnicity, race, nationalism, transnationalism, Hispanic in the Hispanic Caribbean and the United States. He's the author or co-author of 20 books, including several works about Puerto Rico. The point is, super knowledgeable guy. So what I like about this book, and I did do a quick talk about how I was going to start reading books about Puerto Rico a while back. What I like about this particular book, though, is it's just a really great primer for what it is like really the impacts of Puerto Rico over the long term. So they talk about it's kind of loosely broken down into Puerto Rico before 1898, which would be the Spanish colonial times, and prior to the Spanish colonial times. So you've got who lived in Puerto Rico before the Spanish conquest in 1898, or before the Spanish conquest. Who was Ponce de Leon, what was the impact of slavery, and it was fascinating to me in that section because I didn't really know a lot about the early history of Puerto Rico. For example, I didn't even know, and I should have, right, that San Juan is actually named after St. John the Baptist. So it was the island itself was named apparently by Christopher Columbus in 1493. San Juan, is actually named San Juan Bautista, right? St. John the Baptist. So that's sort of interesting. And of course, learn a little bit about the pre-colonial history, about the Taino Indians, and their impact on modern Puerto Rican culture, and then ultimately, how the United States acquired Puerto Rico, and what the impact was of that. So then the second section is what happened in Puerto Rico under United States rule from 1898 until 1952. How they acquired it, right? So part of the war with Spain. Things like that. So there's a lot of really interesting impacts resulting from that. And the book is fascinating in the sense that it breaks it down into these broad strokes. What was the Jones Act? How did that impact everything? And really what kinds of things occurred during the 20s and 30s and 40s, the development of the Puerto Rican parties, the Nationalist Party, the Popular Democratic Party, things like that. And so there's a talk about that, and then it's broken down further. The United States Commonwealth, Puerto Rico as a U.S. Commonwealth since 1952, and then sections on the politics and the economy. So there's talks about various strategies that were used to help with political and economic development in Puerto Rico. Talk a bit in there about the pro-statehood movement, the anti-colonial movement, the various factions wanting independence versus statehood, things like that. And then there's the Commonwealth, Puerto Rico as a U.S. Commonwealth, population and culture, and talks about how initially there was a lot of time spent in Puerto Rico trying to figure out how to reduce the population. So they encourage things like emigration to the mainland United States. They talk about how the various Supreme Court rulings have impacted how Puerto Rican citizenship is thought about. The rights and privileges of being an American citizen are somewhat limited if you're a American citizen living in Puerto Rico. And then it's interesting because you do have the right to travel and or live in the United States mainland, which is effectively gets you some of those constitutional protections that you just simply do not have if you live in Puerto Rico. And interestingly, that applies both ways. So if you live in the United States and then you move to Puerto Rico as a U.S. citizen, even if you're not native Puerto Rican, there's some rights that you end up losing by living in Puerto Rico. And then, of course, there's talk about, the current status politically, how that's impacted. But the point is, very fascinating book. I've been learning a lot. I'm actually not completely done with it. I've been trying to digest it. I started reading this a long time ago, and I've been trying to read like a couple of short chapters at a time because they have these broad sections, and then they have short sections like what were the main stages of Operation Bootstrap, for example. And then they talk about how from 1948 to 1965 there was a big emphasis in Puerto Rico on light manufacturing, labor-intensive manufacturing like textiles and stuff like that. And then they moved from that to heavy manufacturing, and then to high technology, and pharmaceuticals after that. And so it's a very interesting book. And if people want to learn about Puerto Rico, I will highly recommend Puerto Rico, What Everyone Needs to Know. I will put a link in the notes here to Amazon where you can buy this book. And I would say if you're interested in learning more about Puerto Rico, and you're a person that's considering moving to Puerto Rico like me, you really should be interested in learning more about Puerto Rico. It's important to fully learn, assimilate information about a culture that's foreign to you. So for me, as a non-Puerto Rican, as a United States citizen who's never lived in Puerto Rico, who's not from Puerto Rico, is not of Puerto Rican descent, there's an awful lot about Puerto Rico that I just do not know, and reading these books has been really helpful for that. So Puerto Rico, What Everyone Needs to Know. Highly recommended. Go read it. And as always, if you're liking my content, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it on Facebook, do all that kind of stuff, because we're getting really close to 450 subscribers. That's very exciting. Hopefully I will have that very soon. And anyway, thank you so much for checking out the video. I will be producing additional content about Puerto Rico, about my move to Puerto Rico, why I want to move to Puerto Rico, and distributing that in the very near future. So thanks so much, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.